Because I absolutely agree with you. You know, moving from that transactional approach to a strategic point of view, absolutely increases the value that procurement provides within an organization. And I always kind of feel that the procurement function is a relatively young function, compared to some of the kind of other typical business functions like finance or marketing. And if you look at the finance technology stack, it's very well developed. If you look at the marketing technology stack, it's very well developed, worth an enormous amount of market capital. The procurement technology stack is going through its growth phase, I would argue, probably its steepest part of the growth phase around now. In the last few years, it's really exploded. Talking about Carney, looking at the kind of Dr. Eloise Epstein's tech kind of market map, which has just, got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Insane.
I think
Yeah.
she may have had to kind of like almost discontinue it and not really kind of continue to grow it now because it's got so crazy. Um, but I always think within taking that strategic approach, you need data. And I won't go too far down the road of this right now, but that's where with my conversation around services procurement, that's the thing I feel is kind of is missing. But going back to my original point, how do you see services procurement, the procurement of services fitting into the overall landscape as it currently stands for most people?
Yes, I think just kind of stepping back a little bit and a couple of your earlier comments, I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by talking and thinking about procurement as kind of a monolithic discipline that we're bringing tools to, because I think in my mind, procurement actually is more complicated than many of the other disciplines in that it is trying to create a link between the outside and the inside. Whereas a lot of other functions, HR is dealing mainly internally, finance is mainly internal, marketing is pushing out. But procurement has this challenge of being able to deal with the outside world and the inside world and bringing them both together. And there's a lot to that, and I think that's kind of what part of what leads to Eloise's complicated map is there's so many different aspects to procurement that we're trying to enable with technology. That there are literally hundreds of providers, and many have got their own little niche within that big picture. Um, so I think services procurement probably. It is huge. I know from my time in the oil and gas industry, the majority of their spend is on services. If you look at aerospace and defense, massive amount of services spend. Media and entertainment, similarly, its majority is services spend in different, flavors. So the services aspect is enormous, but it's also, I think, uniquely complicated because it's different for every customer in terms of what's their internal operating model that they're looking to bring these services into. What does their landscape look like? How do they operate? How do they run their business? What do they want to do themselves? What do they want a third party to do? Um, and that uniqueness adds to the kind of complexity of services procurement and makes it then the bigger challenge in order to how to I use the term solve, but I think it's not just solving services procurement. It's the ability to bring all of the different kind of capabilities together within a process in order to drive the value.
Yeah, and maybe we'll come back to that a little bit later, but you're talking about like multiple parts of the business that are involved, different stakeholder groups, and that complexity of how it gets delivered within an organization as well as how it gets procured.
Yes, and recognizing that your internal customers, they have a set of objectives to achieve, and procurement is a sometimes a hurdle that they need to get over in order to be able to get their job done. And so they're not necessarily it's not at the top of their list to follow the procurement process, right? They'll do what works best for them, and if it's adding value, then they're much more likely to embrace it. If they don't see it as adding value, then they'll try and work around it.
Yeah, 100%. We did our 2025 services procurement survey. Rogue spend was number one in terms of people's kind of pain points. And ultimately, the person who needs to procure the service and get the work done, that's their objective. That's the thing that's pressing on them. There's the business concern of, I need to get this work done. with this service provider doing it for me. Um, if the procurement process is not effective, they either have to put up with it being very slow and painful for them and for their supplier and for their timelines in getting the work done, or they just have to go rogue. And
Right.
unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of the time. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Just going back to what you were saying about the level of complexity that just exists within the very nature of procurement. I think that's a really interesting point you make about the link between the outside of the organization and the inside of the organization. And I think this is where, again, for me, it comes back to data as the ultimate kind of objective and goal in effective management of spend. Procurement, by doing the work they do with consulting organizations and other service providers, they're getting this unique view of the company from inside the company, looking out at the service providers and looking out at the world, and from the service providers doing the work for them and looking in at their company. So I think with having that understanding of how effective the company is at doing the work that they need to do as part of their services, that's really interesting. And if if that's something where data is being meaningful data is being collected, both quantitative and qualitative kind of feedback, that's enormously strategic information that can be leveraged within the organization. And only really procurement have that viewpoint. They're at that kind of junction.
Yep, yep, I would agree. Just to kind of hark back, we were doing some work with a major oil and gas company on refinery maintenance, and a big part of their spend was scaffolding during turnarounds where they were doing big maintenance overhaul projects. And as part of our process, we were engaging with the suppliers and asking them what was their opinion of how we were running the scaffolding program, and what should we be doing differently. And the response from the CEO of the scaffolding company was, we've never been asked that before, but since you've asked that question, we have lots of feedback. We think you waste a lot of money. You have us do this, you have us do that. We don't need to, right? But that feedback link had never existed between the supplier and the operating team. Procurement was able to kind of create that bridge, take those learnings, and bring new value to the company team that was actually running the projects. So yeah, so that bridge makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think that is a frustration for many procurement people. So I feel like sometimes it sits in two camps. You'll have the people for whom the fact that basically on the services side, it's very difficult for a lot of procurement teams to get their arms around stuff, especially if it's being operated in a kind of in a semi-manual process, or there's lots of stuff going around the process because it's just not scalable. There's no way they can manage the volume of task orders, statements of work, whatever the kind of contractual vehicle might be. It's just not possible for them to do that. So it's very frustrating for them to, for example, get involved in QBRs where the supplier's in for a bit of a telling off because of an extension or price change or this, that, scope change, something like that. Whereas actually, if procurement had been aware of this when it happened, it might have been issues on the client side. It might have been unavoidable issues, and it's just like that communication level. The data isn't really there for that.
Yeah,
So by the
yeah,
time that procurement get pulled into a process where maybe something's not going well, sometimes it's a bit too late, and that information just isn't available unless you want to trawl through a document where the reality of the service delivery may have changed significantly from what was in that original document. And if that hasn't been captured, then that just makes it very difficult for procurement to even have any kind of viewpoint on it.
yeah. I agree. Absolutely, I agree. And then I find too often the business partners say, "Well, let's just fire the supplier," and you're not addressing the root cause of the problem. The supplier wasn't the problem in the first place, and getting a new supplier in isn't going to solve the problem. So you need to be able to have that engagement with the internal customer to address what really is going on as well.